coming to you live from my very comfy couch. We are going to do my July reading wrap up. So I read 8 books this month, which is very exciting. That is probably the most books that I've ever read in 1 month since I've been back on my reading journey as a real adult with like a real job and responsibilities and bills. So I want to go through all of them. I won't go in order. So I signed up for Neck Alley this month and I got very excited and applied to get a bunch of different arcs and I got approved for quite a few of them. So I'm going to start with the advanced reader copies that I got. I read Devil in the Pines by James Kaine, and this book it started off so strong. We start off learning about the New Jersey Devil. This man essentially runs away from New Jersey to start a new life in Chicago. His friend was murdered by the Jersey Devil. Okay, we suspend reality a little bit, but also like great idea. A little bit of lore. We're opening up with historical chapters. But unfortunately, as the story went on, it just kind of lost track for me. The author wrote the historical chapters and like the lore of the Jersey Devil really well. Those were the strongest chapters. I really enjoyed that a lot. I mean, it was back to like I think like the 16 or 1700s, and then a couple jumps through time, but those chapters were awesome. Like I really liked that a lot. And in the beginning of the story, it kind of wove in a way that like made sense, but like just as we went on, it really fell off the rails, unfortunately. First third of the book, we're following Patrick, who had run away from his home, and he starts a new life in Chicago, and he has to come back to Jersey because his mother died. So his aunt calls him up and says, "Listen, your mother passed away. You should really come back for the funeral." And he begrudgingly comes back, even though he does not want to be back in Jersey. He does not want to deal with any of this. Everyone in the town thinks that he actually killed his best friend when they were kids, but only Patrick and a few other people know that it was actually this monster that attacked him. He comes back and sees the detective who still works in town, who essentially interviewed him. And at the time, Patrick didn't think that he believed him. He thought he was making up the whole story about the Jersey Devil. He sees his high school sweetheart and some other people that, tortured him as a kid, essentially, because they thought he was this murderer. The first third of the book was really great. As we got to the second third of the book, felt a little like sluggish. Like there was certain information that was getting out, but it felt very much like filler to me. And then the last third where we're just getting bombarded with information. Go, 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 go. And also the story was a good build in the first third because we're getting, the background and we're getting information at a decent pace. The middle felt like a slog. So then you go from what felt like a slog to this breakneck speed. Also, the stakes ramped up like an insane amount. Like the pacing was just definitely was not right for this book. And the author in the afterword, the author is James Kaine, talks about he rushed to get a deadline. So I'm not no shade to this author. I'm just agreeing with what he said in his afterword. He was like, "Oh, we made the deadline." Yeah, but at what cost? I wouldn't be opposed to reading other things from this author. I think that there's a lot of potential here. The premise of this I absolutely loved, but just wasn't really a well-rounded out story for me. So I did rate it a 2.5. And I did give my feedback on Neck Alley. So shout out to Neck Alley and James Kaine and the publisher for approving my arc of this. The other arc I read this month is Children Born of Wildfire, which is a memoir by Angela Hoy. And I thought this was really well done. I rate memoirs not based on the content of the story because that's not for me to determine what someone's story is, but rather for how they deliver that story and more of like the style. So obviously it's extremely personal preference, but I mean, that's why we're out here giving our opinions on books, right? So Angela Hoy chronicles her life as a child where her grandparents actually kidnapped her away from her father, and her mother had disappeared for a little bit and then came back and met up with the grandparents. It was the maternal grandparents who had kidnapped her and her sister. And then her mother and her grandparents just continue to put her and her sister in these really, really bad situations for the next essentially 20 years. Her mother's boyfriends are abusive, verbally, physically, sexually, and it's pretty sad what happened to these two girls. But they do get reunited with their father after 27 years. It was nice to read about that reunion in her memoir that she got to have that. So I thought that was very beautiful. I thought the storytelling was a little disjointed at times. It seemed like every chapter we were kind of like hopping, but we weren't necessarily in chronological order. So sometimes it just felt a little out of place. But all in all, I rated it 3.25 stars. I thought it was a good read, and I would definitely give it a maybe if you're interested in memoirs. I love reading memoirs, so even if someone's not super enthusiastic about one, I generally want to pick it up if it sounds interesting to me. All right, let's move into the physical books that I read this month. So I did finish The Bombshell by Darrow Farr. This is Darrow Farr's debut novel, and we are following a young French girl who's the daughter of a French diplomat as she is in Corsica for the summer in the early 90s during the Corsican independence movement. She gets kidnapped by Corsican rebels who want ransom for her and also in exchange for another prisoner who the government is holding. And as she stays with her kidnappers, she gets to know them and then participates in the movement from there on. This book was so much more entertaining than I thought it was going to be. The backdrop and the atmosphere of this book, 10 out of 10. Like, you really get the picture that you're on like the European coast in the summertime. Corsica sounds amazing. I want to go now. Also, like the information that you get woven into the story about this Corsican independence movement that I personally didn't really know anything about. I really enjoyed that whole backdrop of the story. It gets a little controversial because our female main character, Severine, is 17 and then turns 18 while she's in the custody of these kidnappers. And, at some point, she begins a romantic relationship with one of the kidnappers. Now, a lot of people are arguing that it's a story that glorifies grooming and Stockholm syndrome. And while I definitely can see that, I don't know if I'm 100% agree with that, only because in the book, she was treated so well by these kidnappers. And I don't mean well like, she was kidnapped, so obviously she wasn't treated well. But, there was no other really bad things that you can imagine would happen for the most part for a young teenage girl being kidnapped by three men, no matter how old they are. I think a couple of them are between like 22, 23, and then Bruno, who's the one who she has a relationship with, ends up having a relationship with, is like 26. So there was not like a lot of like sexual coercion in terms of, they were forcing themselves on her. They kept her locked away, but she was like fed and she was allowed to, basic human things that you would need when you're watching someone, let's say. Does that make it right? No, that doesn't make it right. Does it make the story interesting? I think it made it really interesting because Severine in the book, being 17, 18 years old, she is like so acutely aware of her sexuality, of her power that she can hold over people because of her beauty. And like she understands men's desires. And it's just really interesting the way that her wielding that power kind of unfolded throughout the story. So I don't know if necessarily there was like she was necessarily coerced, but obviously 26-year-old man with a 18-year-old girl, not a good look. Not a good look. I enjoyed it in the story, however. Normally I don't. So I would say that that's a win for the author because I generally hate an age gap and I think it's terrible, but I was kind of invested in these two, so I kind of enjoyed this part of the story. Severine also takes part in some of the work with the rebels, and she's making videos. She becomes like the face of the movement. but she also wants to be an actress. So it's super self-serving because it's like, does she even really believe in Corsican independence? So is she the face of the movement because she believes in the movement, or because she wanted to be an actress and kind of wanted to be famous? And that's kind of what she fit into. Then all the French girls start wearing their makeup like her and their hair like her and their outfit like her. And she kind of becomes this like idea of something. She does take place in some violent rebellion, though, which is like the climax of the story, which I thought was really great and really interesting, very fast paced, and at that section, and really well done. And then we do see a time jump at the end of the book, however many years later, and you kind of see what's going on with everybody. I want to keep it light. That's very light. That's barely spoilers. I don't want to spoil it for anybody. I liked it way more than I thought I would. I really don't know what I thought I was going to get out of this book, but I enjoyed it, and I gave it a 3.75 stars. Really enjoyed it, especially for a debut. My historical nonfiction read for the month, I finally finished up Duel by Thomas Fleming, and this chronicles Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr's infamous duel, in which Alexander Hamilton was shot and killed. I had previously finished the Alexander Hamilton biography by Ron Chernow, which is like the definitive Alexander Hamilton biography. And then I also had read a biography on Aaron Burr by, I believe it's David O. Stewart. I'll correct on the screen if I got that wrong. And it was called American Emperor. That book was so interesting. There were so many facets of Aaron Burr that like I had not known about. I'm a pretty big history buff. Like I paid attention in history class. I don't remember learning about any of that. Like there's a lot of interesting things about Aaron Burr that you can learn about, which most of which were not included in this book. And if you're interested in the background, the politics of the time, the background of each of the men, I mean, Alexander Hamilton's a huge, something huge to bite off. But if you are interested in the man, you should read that biography, no matter how long it takes you. It's the definitive work. But definitely read American Emperor, about Aaron Burr. Super interesting. This, though, not so much. I gave it a 2.5. It did outline some interesting information, but for the most part, we were like kind of like totally in the politics of the time, which is important context, but it was a lot of information that I had already read. So maybe that's what made me biased against it. Also, kind of felt like a slog to read at times, like very textbook, very this and then this and then this. And I really love when a nonfiction book can read like a fiction book. So, which I know is not easy to do, but unfortunately, that one did not pull it off for me. Next, I read The Ghostwriter by Julie Clarke, and I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a super solid thriller. I have not read any of Julie Clarke's other work. I have since been suggested a few things by her, but I rated The Ghostwriter a 4.25. Thought it was a super solid thriller. So essentially, we're following a woman who works as a ghostwriter, and she has called out a male colleague for really bad behavior and has kind of got blacklisted in her industry. She is then asked to go help a very famous horror writer write a memoir. And this particular horror writer happens to be her father, who she no longer speaks to. Because when her father was younger, his two siblings were brutally murdered, and most people think that he had something to do with it. So he's writing the memoir to kind of like set the record straight and put all the information out there. There was parts of this book that were predictable, or that like we've seen things end this way before, but I will say what I loved about this book is like the way that the information was revealed, or like the road we took to get to that conclusion was unexpected. So I think that's a really great way to like use a typical thriller trope, or like, a theme. Like, I don't know, it's the creepy guy in the glasses, right? But if it's the creepy guy in the glasses, how do we get to that information? Do we think it's someone else before we think it's the creepy guy in the glasses? Did we just assume it was the creepy guy in the glasses from the beginning? Is the creepy guy in the glasses not even really fully guilty? Like, is there some gray area? Not saying that that's what happened with this story, but I really liked how we moved through the story. We got multiple points of view. We got the female main character's point of view, her dad's point of view, and her aunt, who was the young girl who was killed. But just really solid, well done. Great little summer beach read. Next, I finally read Piranesi, and this had been something that I've wanted to read for literal years now. I went into Piranesi pretty much completely blind, which is how everybody that I really like in the book space told me to go into this story. So I really had no idea what was going on. But I stuck with it like everyone tells me to do. And then I was like, this is incredible. This is probably the most original book I've ever read. And I know I'm not I haven't read as much as some people, but this was so interesting. This was so introspective. It just made you really think. Susanna Clarke does a really great job of getting you in the environment of the book. Like you where you are, you like fully understand the space that you're in this book. Is how I want to say it to not give anything away. But I just thought it was really beautiful writing. I thought it was excellently paced. I think for the story being less than 300 pages, I mean, there is a ton of story in 200 and is it 45 pages? 245 pages. It's absolutely fantastic, and I see why people say this is a like excellent recommendation for a standalone fantasy. I mean, what standalone fantasy can pack that much punch in 245 pages? I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I would also second all of those reviews that this is absolutely something you have to read. Next, I read Razorblade Tears. And oh my God, I started a series on Instagram and TikTok called Gut Instinct because I went out and bought all of S.A. Cosby's work before I read any of his writing. So that was my gut instinct that he was going to be an author for me, you know? And I'm so glad that I did this. And I don't know what I was expecting, but everything so far that I have seen from this author has been above and beyond. It's been absolutely fantastic. I read Blacktop Wasteland last month and it was so good. And I was being very nitpicky about my score because I knew there was more greatness on the horizon. So I had rated that like 4.75. Razorblade Tears, easy 5 stars. Like I didn't even have to question it. Absolutely fantastic. S.A. Cosby is a absolute genius at packing in the emotion with the action in these shorter books. Like Blacktop Wasteland's under 300 pages. Razorblade Tears is a little over 300 pages. And for a story to be that length and have that much emotional impact and make you feel like you're watching a movie, I think is just, it's like a wonder. I think we're in a space now where like people think these stories have to be 500, 600, 700 pages long. And sometimes you do need a book that's that long, right? Like if we're world building, if we're doing big character, studies, if we're really delving into like the nitty-gritty details, sure, like some books should be that long, but it's just proof that a really, really excellent, entertaining, emotionally impactful story doesn't have to be that long and doesn't have to be intimidating to people who wouldn't pick up a 500 or 600 page book off the bat. Maybe someone who's just getting back into reading, but absolutely phenomenal work by S.A. Cosby. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite contemporary authors, maybe one of my favorite authors ever. I mean, it's the books are the characters are so well flushed out. Like, you know who these people are within a few pages of either meeting them or being in their shoes, and you fully grasp like what's at stake with these people, and like the stakes are always really high, right? And he just does such a great job of weaving all of these really important issues like poverty and classism and racism and in Razorblade Tears homophobia into the story, and it feels so authentic and it feels so genuine. It doesn't feel like someone's preaching to you or just saying things aren't resolved with just oh yeah, well now I get it now. Like it's a little bit of that because the story moves along really quickly, but it's done in a really, really lovely, raw and real but also gentle way. And not necessarily gentle in terms of like there are violent scenes in this. Like there is some visceral, like stuff that made my stomach turn a little bit. Um, there's some hard stuff in these books, and there's a lot of gore and a lot of grit, but it's also you're also rooting for these anti-heroes, and I love that in a story. I absolutely love that in a story. So easy 5 stars, fantastic. Probably shaping up to be one of my favorite books ever. And then finally, at the end of the month, I finally finished The Hunger Games. This is a reread. I have not read these books since I was a teenager, maybe my early 20s. I'm 35 for reference, but we won't tell that many people. And I went into reading The Hunger Games being like, oh, I want to reread these because I never read Ballad of Songbird and Snakes. I do not remember if I read Mockingjay. I feel like I didn't finish it. And I wanted to read Sunrise on the Reaping. So I was like, this is a perfect time to reread the series. And I went in thinking there is no way that this book could be as good as like I remember it to be when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. I feel like The Hunger Games specifically, because I'm going to be starting the next book this month. Hunger Games is actually better than I remember it when I was that young. And I don't know if that's just because like it's easier for me to decipher, you know, the themes and the nuances and all of the I mean, although I think it's pretty obvious. Suzanne Collins just really puts it all out there. But it's fantastic. It's even like I said, it's even better than I remember, and it's so good. It's so good, and what these poor kids have to go through is just unbelievable. And it makes me remember that YA can be done so incredibly well, but it has to be done well, right? Like I don't read a lot of YA. It's usually not my thing now as an adult. I prefer books geared towards adults, not necessarily YA books. But when it's done right, it is absolutely done right. I mean, Suzanne Collins can write anything. Just absolutely fantastic. The depth of the characters that we get in these books is it's really fantastic, and for them to be teenagers and I mean, talk about a high stakes book. The stakes couldn't be higher in Hunger Games, and like you feel that. It's not like it's poo-pooed and kind of like, oh yeah, oh we have the Hunger Games and it's a fight to the death, and then you don't really talk about it. It's like, no, it's described in detail how these kids are dying. When Katniss puts the flowers around Rue when she dies, it's because the message is clear of what it means. And oh, it's so good. It's absolutely so good, and I cannot wait to continue with the series. I know it's going to be an amazing rest of the reread on the Hunger Games. That was my July reading wrap up. Thank you guys for sticking with me on this quite lengthy video. And I'm going to be putting up my August TBR soon. So hope you stick around for that. And let me know what your favorite book that you read in July was. I'll see you guys next time.